What happens when a millionaire husband tries to paint his pregnant wife as an unstable party girl to win custody? You're about to find out. In a silent wood-paneled courtroom, Donovan Sterling, a man whose name is synonymous with power, spun a web of lies against his wife, Isabella. He depicted her as a reckless gold digger, unfit for motherhood. But he never imagined her lawyer, the sharp-witted Anya Sharma, had an ace up her sleeve: a secret recording. A single piece of evidence that would not just unravel his case but detonate his entire carefully constructed world. Stay tuned. The air in Family Court Department 12 was stale, tasting of old paper, cheap polish, and the ghosts of 1,000 fractured families. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all beige walls and unforgiving fluorescent lights, a world away from the life Isabella Sterling had known for the past 3 years. Her world was one of Carrara marble floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and the subtle, ever-present scent of fresh-cut lilies that her husband Donovan insisted upon. Now the only scent was the bitter tang of antiseptic and fear. Isabella sat beside her lawyer, Ms. Anya Sharma. At 7 months pregnant, the mahogany chair felt less like a seat and more like a vice. The baby, a boy they had planned for and celebrated, was a restless lump beneath her ribs, kicking and turning as if sensing his mother's distress. She rested a protective hand on her stomach, a gesture that was both instinctual and a desperate anchor in the churning sea of the courtroom. Across the aisle sat the man who had been the architect of her gilded cage, Donovan Sterling. He wasn't just handsome, he was sculpted, a testament to what immense wealth and unrelenting discipline could achieve. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, a whisper of dark charcoal that probably cost more than the car Isabella had driven in college. His hair, just starting to silver at the temples, was perfectly coiffed. He exuded an aura of calm, unassailable power. When he looked at her, which he did only briefly, his eyes, the same brilliant blue eyes that had once promised her forever, were as cold and empty as a winter sky. Beside him was Preston Hayes, a legal predator known for his scorched earth tactics. Hayes was the kind of lawyer who didn't just win cases, he annihilated opponents, leaving them emotionally and financially destitute. He was a perfect reflection of his client. All rise. The bailiff's voice boomed and Isabella struggled to her feet. Judge Mary Ann Thorne swept into the room, her black robes flowing behind her. She was a woman in her late 50s with a reputation for suffering no fools. Her eyes, magnified by her reading glasses, scanned the room, lingering for a moment on Isabella's swollen belly before settling on the lawyers' tables. "Be seated," she said, her voice crisp. "We are here today regarding the petition for sole custody filed by Mr. Donovan Sterling for the unborn child of his marriage to Mrs. Isabella Sterling. Mr. Hayes, you may begin." Preston. Hayes rose smoothly to his feet. "Thank you, Your Honor." He clasped his hands behind his back and paced slowly before the judge's bench, his voice a low, reasonable hum that was far more menacing than a shout. "Your Honor, we are here today for a matter of grave importance. We are here to protect a child, an unborn child who is through no fault of his own in a perilous situation." He paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. He gestured towards his client. "Mr. Donovan Sterling, as the court knows, is a pillar of this community, a philanthropist, an innovator, a man of unimpeachable character. His success is legendary, but what is less known is his profound desire for a family. A desire he thought was being realized with his wife Isabella." Hayes turned his gaze on Isabella. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it was laden with a kind of sorrowful disappointment that made her skin crawl. Unfortunately, since becoming pregnant, Mrs. Sterling has displayed a pattern of behavior that can only be described as deeply alarming. It is a pattern of instability, of recklessness, and of a shocking disregard for the well-being of her own child. Anya Sharma, beside Isabella, remained perfectly still, her face a mask of calm professionalism. She had warned Isabella this would happen. "They will try to paint you as a monster," Anya had said, her voice firm but kind. "They will take every out-of-context photo, every misunderstood comment, every private moment of weakness, and twist it into a weapon. Do not react. Let them build their house of cards. The higher they build it, the farther it has to fall." Isabella clung to those words now, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. "We will present evidence, Your Honor," Hayes continued, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "Evidence of late-night parties, of excessive drinking while pregnant, I must add, and of volatile emotional outbursts that have created an unsafe environment. My client, Mr. Sterling, has done everything in his power to support his wife. He has suggested therapy, offered to hire round-the-clock medical assistance, pleaded with her to consider the baby. But his pleas have fallen on deaf ears." Isabella felt a hot flush of anger. The late-night parties were dinners with her two closest friends that ended by 10 p.m. The excessive drinking was a single incident weeks before she even knew she was pregnant, where she'd had 2 glasses of wine at a gallery opening, a photo Donovan himself had posted on Instagram, with the caption, "My beautiful, fun-loving wife." The volatile emotional outbursts were moments of tears and anxiety fueled by pregnancy hormones and the growing terrifying realization that her husband was becoming a stranger to her. "Mr. Sterling is not seeking to punish his wife," Hayes said, his tone softening into one of pure reason. "He is seeking to protect his son. He believes, and we will prove, that granting him sole legal and physical custody is the only way to ensure this child is born into a safe, stable, and loving home. He is asking the court to do what is right, not what is easy. He is asking the court to save his child from a mother who has tragically become a danger to him." Hayes sat down. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Isabella could feel the eyes of the court on her, the judge, the stenographer, the bailiff. She could feel their judgment, the seeds of doubt Hayes had so expertly planted. In their eyes, she was no longer Isabella Sterling, a woman expecting her first child. She was a headline in the making, the unstable, partying, pregnant wife of a beloved billionaire. Her world had shrunk to this single suffocating room, and the first blow had just been struck. She looked at Donovan, searching for any flicker of the man she had married, but found none. He was a statue, a monument to his own ambition, and she was just a small, inconvenient obstacle to be bulldozed. The petitioner calls Mr. Donovan Sterling to the stand. Donovan rose and walked to the witness box with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. He was sworn in his hand, resting on the Bible with a gravity that seemed almost holy. He settled into the chair, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at his lawyer, Preston Hayes. He was ready to perform. Mr. Sterling, Hayes began, his tone gentle, as if approaching a man carrying a great burden. "Could you please state your relationship to the respondent, Mrs. Isabella Sterling?" "She is my wife," Donovan said, his voice laced with a carefully measured sadness. "And she is currently pregnant with your child?" "Yes. A boy." We were overjoyed. Mr. Sterling, you have filed for sole custody of this child. Can you tell the court why you have taken such a drastic and painful step?" Donovan sighed, a theatrical exhalation of long-suffering patience. He turned his gaze to Judge Thorne, his blue eyes radiating sincerity. "Your Honor, this is the last thing I ever wanted. I love my wife, but the woman she has become since getting pregnant, I don't recognize her, and more importantly, I fear for the safety of our son. Can you provide the court with specific examples of the behavior that has caused you this fear?" Hayes prompted. It started subtly. Donovan began weaving his narrative with the skill of a master storyteller. Mood swings at first. I chalked it up to hormones. I tried to be supportive. I'd come home from a 16-hour day at the office and she'd be distant, cold, or she'd fly into a rage over nothing. The caterer using the wrong kind of olive oil. The dry cleaner pressing my shirts incorrectly. Isabella's hands clenched into fists under the table. The olive oil incident had been a brief moment of frustration after a day of debilitating morning sickness. The issue with the shirts had been her discovering a receipt from a hotel bar in Donovan's suit pocket, a hotel in their own city on a night he was supposed to be working late at the office. When she'd confronted him, he'd flown into a rage, accusing her of being a paranoid, snooping hysteric. But then it escalated. Donovan continued, his voice dropping. She started going out, constantly, to clubs, to parties, leaving at 10 at night and coming home at 3 or 4 in the morning smelling of smoke and alcohol. While pregnant, Hayes asked, his eyebrows raised in feigned shock. "Yes," Donovan said, shaking his head sorrowfully. "I begged her to stop. I told her, 'Isabella, think of the baby.' She would just laugh and say I was being controlling, old-fashioned. She told me it was her body." Anya Sharma wrote furiously on her legal pad, her expression unchanging. "Can you recall a specific event that crystallized your concerns?" Hayes asked. "Yes," Donovan said, his gaze flicking towards Isabella. "There was a party, about 2 months ago, at our home." He paused, as if gathering the strength to recount the painful memory. "I was away on a business trip in Zurich, closing a merger that ironically was meant to secure our child's future for generations. I had my assistant Chloe check in on Isabella, just to make sure she had everything she needed." He gestured vaguely towards the back of the courtroom, where a mousy-haired young woman in a severe gray suit sat watching her face, a picture of anxious loyalty. This was Chloe Bishop, Donovan's ever-present executive assistant. "Chloe called me panicked. She said there were dozens of people at the house, loud music shouting. She said she saw Isabella drinking what looked like a cocktail and dancing on the ottoman. An ottoman, Your Honor, while 6 months pregnant. When Chloe tried to intervene to gently suggest that maybe it wasn't safe, Isabella apparently became belligerent. She called Chloe a corporate spy and had her friend, a woman named Jenna Monroe, escort her out of the house." Isabella stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. The party had been a baby shower. Her cousin Jenna and 2 other friends had organized it. There were 8 people in total. They had played silly games, opened gifts, and eaten cake. The cocktail was a non-alcoholic mojito Jenna had made for her. The dancing on the ottoman was her laughing as she stood on it for 10 seconds to adjust a banner that had come loose. And Chloe Bishop hadn't checked in. She had shown up unannounced, her face a mask of disapproval, and had begun taking photos with her phone until Jenna had politely but firmly asked her to leave. "What did you do?" Hayes asked. "I flew home immediately. I took the first flight out of Zurich. When I arrived, the house was a wreck. Empty glasses, bottles. I found Isabella asleep in bed, still in her party dress. I tried to talk to her the next day, but she wouldn't listen. She accused me of spying on her, of trying to ruin her life. It was then I knew I couldn't trust her to keep our child safe. That her judgment was dangerously impaired." He looked at Judge Thorne, his expression a perfect blend of heartbreak and resolve. "Your Honor, I am a very private man. To air this in public is deeply humiliating. But I will do anything to protect my son. Isabella needs help, professional help, and until she gets it, our child needs to be with me. We will also hear testimony from Ms. Chloe Bishop Hayes announced, who will corroborate this and other events. And we have photographs, Your Honor, taken by Ms. Bishop at the party in question." Hayes walked to the table and produced a set of glossy 8x10 photos. He handed them to the bailiff, who passed them up to the judge. Isabella craned her neck to see. They were the photos Chloe had taken. Close-ups cleverly framed. One showed Isabella with the mocktail, the glass angled so you couldn't see the mint leaves and lime that would distinguish it from a real mojito. Another was a blurry shot of her on the ottoman, her dress hiked up slightly, her face caught in a wide-mouthed laugh that, without context, looked manic. A third showed a collection of empty wine and champagne bottles on the counter, bottles that had been brought by her guests for their own consumption and which Isabella had never touched. Seen through the lens of Donovan's testimony, the photos were damning. They were a masterpiece of deception, a carefully curated collection of lies. Isabella looked at her husband, the man who had held her hand during the first ultrasound, and whispered, "We made a miracle." He was now using that same miracle as a pawn in a game she didn't even understand. He wasn't just trying to take her son. He was trying to erase her, to rewrite their history, to paint her as a villain in her own life story. And as she watched the judge study the photographs with a grim expression, a terrifying thought took hold. It was working. When Preston Hayes concluded his direct examination, the narrative he and Donovan had woven hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a story of a benevolent, worried husband and a beautiful, broken wife spiraling out of control. It was simple, compelling, and utterly false. Now it was Anya Sharma's turn. She stood, and the energy in the room shifted. Where Hayes was all theatrical motion and resonant tones, Anya was a study in stillness. She approached the witness stand without hurry, her files left untouched at her table. She offered Donovan a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the heavy silence. "You've built an impressive empire. Sterling Holdings is a global leader in technology and logistics. That must require a great deal of your time." "It does," Donovan said, his posture relaxing slightly. He was on comfortable ground now, his success. "It's a demanding business. 16-hour days, as you mentioned, often yes, and frequent travel. Zurich, Tokyo, London." "It's the nature of a global business," he confirmed, a hint of pride in his voice. "So it would be fair to say that in the last 7 months since you learned of Mrs. Sterling's pregnancy, you have been away from home quite a bit." Donovan shifted. "I've been as present as I possibly can be. But you were in Zurich for the merger, as you said. The week before that, you were in Singapore for a keynote address. And 2 weeks before that, you were in Dubai for a capital-raising summit. Is that correct?" Donovan's eyes narrowed. "My schedule is complex. I believe so. So while you were expressing these grave concerns about your wife's stability and her supposed late-night partying, you yourself were frequently in different time zones, thousands of miles away. I was providing for my family," he retorted, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "And I had people like my assistant Chloe keeping me informed." "Ah yes, Chloe Bishop," Anya said, as if the name had just occurred to her. "How long has she worked for you, Mr. Sterling?" "About 5 years. And you trust her implicitly." "She is the most loyal and efficient assistant I've ever had," he stated. "Is it part of her official duties to report on your wife's activities?" Preston Hayes stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is mischaracterizing the witness's testimony." "I'll rephrase," Anya said smoothly before the judge could rule. "Mr. Sterling, when you sent Ms. Bishop to your home on the night of the baby shower, was she there in her capacity as an employee of Sterling Holdings or as your personal informant?" Donovan's jaw tightened. "I asked her to check on my wife's well-being. Any decent person would have done the same. But you didn't ask your wife's cousin, Jenna Monroe, who was present, or her best friend Sarah, who was also there. You chose your paid employee, the one person in the house who had a professional and financial loyalty to you." "I trust Chloe's judgment," he said stiffly. "Let's talk about that judgment." Anya continued, her pace quickening. "You testified that your wife was drinking a cocktail. Did Chloe taste the drink? I don't know. Did she run a toxicology report on the glass?" "No." "So this assertion is based purely on Ms. Bishop's visual assessment from across a room. It was a cocktail glass. She was drinking from it." "My client will testify it was a non-alcoholic mojito, Mr. Sterling. Are you an expert on mocktails?" The question was absurd, and it was meant to be. A ripple of something, not quite a laugh, but a release of tension, went through the small audience in the courtroom. Donovan flushed. "Of course not." "And the photographs," Anya said, gesturing toward the judge's bench. "The ones Ms. Bishop so conveniently took. They show empty wine bottles. Do you know who brought those bottles to the house? I assume my wife purchased them. Would it surprise you to learn they were brought by guests as gifts? And that your wife, who you claim was drinking excessively, didn't have a single drop? That's what she would say." Donovan sneered. Anya took a step closer. Her voice lowered, becoming more intimate, more pointed. "Mr. Sterling, you portray yourself as a concerned husband, devastated by your wife's behavior. But let's discuss your own. 3 weeks ago on June 24th, you told your wife you were working late at the office to prepare for an audit, correct? Donovan's composure finally cracked. A flicker of panic entered his eyes. I don't recall my exact schedule. Let me refresh your memory, Anya said, her voice like ice. Your office building closes at 10 p.m. Security logs show you swiped out at 7:15 p.m. However, a credit card statement shows a charge at 9:47 p.m. at the Elysian Hotel rooftop bar, and another charge an hour later for valet parking at the same hotel. That's the hotel where your assistant Chloe Bishop lives in a corporate apartment, isn't it? Preston Hayes was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is a fishing expedition. It has no relevance to the custody of the child. It has every relevance. Your Honor, Anya countered, turning to the judge. Mr. Sterling's petition is based entirely on his credibility. He is painting a picture of himself as a devoted, homebound husband worried sick about his pregnant wife. But the evidence suggests he was not at the office working. It suggests he was at a hotel bar near his assistant's apartment. It speaks to a pattern of deceit, which is the very thing he is accusing my client of. It goes to the heart of who is telling the truth in this courtroom. Judge Thorne leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Donovan. She looked from him to the anxious face of Chloe Bishop in the gallery. Objection overruled. The witness will answer the question. All eyes were on Donovan. The king in his custom suit was no longer looking regal. A sheen of sweat had appeared on his brow. The courtroom was silent, waiting. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling, Anya pressed. Were you with Chloe Bishop at the Elysian Hotel on the night you told your wife you were buried in work? Donovan stared at Anya, his face a mask of fury. The carefully constructed persona of the worried husband was crumbling, and beneath it was something ugly and arrogant. He had walked into this courtroom a king, certain of his victory. But Anya Sharma had just started to pull the threads of his royal robes, and he was beginning to realize he might be left standing naked before the court. I sometimes conduct informal business meetings at various locations. He stammered the lie, thin and unconvincing. Ms. Bishop is my executive assistant. Her presence is often required. The answer was weak, and everyone knew it. The first real crack had appeared in Donovan Sterling's gilded facade. It was no longer a simple case of a good husband versus a bad wife. It was something far murkier, and Anya Sharma was just getting started. The momentum had shifted. You could feel it in the way the court stenographer's fingers flew across her keys, in the intent forward lean of Judge Thorne, and in the pallor of Preston Hayes's face. He now had to rehabilitate his client's image, a task made more difficult by the cloud of deceit Anya Sharma had so skillfully conjured. Hayes's next move was to call the witness he believed would solidify their case. The petitioner calls Ms. Chloe Bishop to the stand. Chloe Bishop walked to the stand with quick, nervous steps. She was a woman who seemed to be trying to take up as little space as possible. Her gray suit was severe, her light brown hair was pulled back in a tight, unforgiving bun, and her eyes darted around the room, avoiding contact with Isabella, Anya, and especially the judge. She looked less like a corporate spy and more like a frightened mouse. Hayes handled her with kid gloves. Ms. Bishop, you are Mr. Sterling's executive assistant. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please speak up for the record, Judge Thorne instructed. Yes, Chloe repeated louder this time. And how would you describe your relationship with Mr. Sterling? Hayes asked. He's my boss. He's a very demanding but fair boss. A great mentor. Are you friends outside of work? No. It's a strictly professional relationship, she said a little too quickly. Hayes moved on to the night of the baby shower. He had Chloe recount the story she had presumably rehearsed with him and Donovan. She spoke of the loud music, the crowd of people, and her concern for Isabella. And you saw Mrs. Sterling drinking what appeared to be an alcoholic beverage, Hayes prompted. Yes, it was in a cocktail glass. She was very animated, laughing very loudly. And you saw her dancing on a piece of furniture? On an ottoman? Yes. Chloe confirmed, her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. I was worried she would fall. I tried to speak to her, but her friend, a tall woman with dark hair, she got in my face. She told me I wasn't welcome and made me leave. This must have been very distressing for you, Hayes said sympathetically. It was. I was just trying to help. I called Mr. Sterling in Zurich immediately because I was genuinely scared for the baby. Hayes had her identify the photos she had taken, confirming she was the one who captured the incriminating images. She performed her role adequately, if not convincingly. She was a loyal soldier delivering her lines as ordered. She had provided the corroboration Donovan's story needed. When Hayes finished, he looked at Anya Sharma with an expression that said, "Your turn." Anya rose. She didn't approach Chloe. She stayed by her table, creating a deliberate distance. Ms. Bishop, you testified that your relationship with Mr. Sterling is strictly professional. Is that correct? Yes, Chloe said, her hands twisting a small tissue in her lap. Is meeting your boss at a hotel bar at 10 o'clock at night, a hotel where you happen to reside, part of your professional duties? Chloe's face went pale. We had urgent business to discuss. Urgent business that couldn't be discussed at the office or over the phone. It required an in-person meeting late at night at a bar. Mr. Sterling's schedule is unconventional? Chloe stammered. I'm sure it is, Anya said dryly. Let's move on to the party. You described a large crowd. How many people exactly would you say were there? I don't know, 30, maybe 40 people. 30 or 40. In a living room. That's quite a crowd. Are you certain of that number? It felt like a lot. It was very loud. You mentioned Mrs. Sterling's friend, a tall woman with dark hair, who escorted you out. You were referring to Jenna Monroe, correct? I believe that was her name. Thank you, Ms. Bishop. No further questions. Anya's dismissal was so abrupt it left Chloe blinking in confusion. Preston Hayes looked relieved. He clearly thought Anya had failed to land a significant blow. He was wrong. Anya hadn't been trying to break Chloe Bishop. She had been using her to set the stage for her own witness. The defense calls Ms. Jenna Monroe to the stand, Anya announced. A tall, striking woman with a cascade of dark curly hair and a confident stride walked to the witness box. She wore a simple navy blue dress and looked directly at Isabella, giving her a small, reassuring smile before being sworn in. Ms. Monroe. Anya began. You are Isabella Sterling's cousin. Is that correct? Yes. We grew up together. We're more like sisters. And you were present at her home on the evening of May 12th of this year. I was. I helped plan her baby shower. The word baby shower seemed to change the atmospheric pressure in the room. It provided a context that Donovan and Chloe had deliberately omitted. A baby shower, Anya repeated. Could you describe this event for the court? Was it as Ms. Bishop testified? A wild party with 30 to 40 people? Jenna laughed, a genuine warm sound that was a stark contrast to the tension of the day. Good heavens, no. There were 8 of us in total. Me, Isabella, and 6 of her closest friends. We had finger sandwiches, a fruit platter, and a cake from her favorite bakery. It was over by 9:30 because Isabella was exhausted. Ms. Bishop testified she saw dozens of people and heard loud music. The music was a playlist of 70s soul music played from a small Bluetooth speaker. And unless 8 pregnant women and their friends count as dozens, then no, that's a complete fabrication. Let's talk about the alleged drinking, Anya said. Did you see your cousin consume any alcohol that night? Absolutely not. Jenna said, her expression turning fierce. I was the one who made her drinks. I made her 2 non-alcoholic mojitos. They were water, lime juice, muddled mint, and a splash of simple syrup. That's it. I would never ever let her have a drop of alcohol while pregnant. And the dancing on the ottoman, Jenna smiled again. A banner we had hung up that said, "Congratulations, Mama," started to droop on one side. Isabella, being a perfectionist, hopped up on the ottoman for a few seconds to fix it. We were all laughing. It was a sweet, funny moment. Then Ms. Chloe Bishop arrived, Anya stated. Jenna's demeanor hardened. She didn't just arrive. She let herself in with a key code and started walking around the living room looking at everyone with this judgmental glare. Then she took out her phone and started taking pictures. Not like a friend capturing a happy memory, but like she was gathering evidence. It was incredibly invasive and creepy. "What did you do?" I walked over to her and asked her what she was doing. She said Mr. Sterling had sent her to check on things. I told her that Isabella was fine, surrounded by friends, and that if she wanted to stay, she could put her phone away and have a piece of cake. She refused. She kept trying to take pictures. So yes, I stood in her way and told her that if she wasn't there to celebrate with her, she needed to leave. So she left. Anya walked back to her table. "Your Honor, the defense has presented a starkly different version of events from the petitioner. One version, told by a paid employee with a questionable alibi about her late-night meetings with her boss, describes a wild, dangerous party. The other, told by a lifelong family member, describes a quiet baby shower." She paused, letting the contrast sink in. "It seems to be a matter of he said, she said. A matter of who the court chooses to believe. Unless, of course, there is a piece of evidence that can cut through the lies. Evidence that can reveal the truth in no uncertain terms." Anya Sharma picked up a small digital audio recorder from her table. She held it up so the Judge Donovan and his lawyer could see it. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with a sudden, sharp authority. "At this time, the defense would like to play a secret recording for the court." The 4 words "a secret recording" landed like a grenade in the center of the silent courtroom. Preston Hayes shot to his feet, his face a mask of outrage. "Objection. Your Honor, this is outrageous. We have no prior knowledge of this recording. What is this? Where did it come from? This is an ambush. I demand to know the foundation for this so-called evidence." Judge Thorne held up a hand, silencing him. She fixed her gaze on Anya Sharma. "Ms. Sharma, you're making an extraordinary request. Explain." Anya remained unnervingly calm. "Certainly, Your Honor. The recording is a conversation that took place on June 28th of this year. It is relevant as it directly pertains to Mr. Sterling's motivations and credibility in filing this petition. As for the foundation, my client, Mrs. Sterling, made the recording." Donovan, who had been watching with a mixture of arrogance and annoyance, now looked truly unsettled. He stared at Isabella, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. Isabella, in turn, looked down at her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had given the recorder to Anya, but hearing it spoken of in open court made it terrifyingly real. It was recorded in their home, a 2-party consent state, Hayes argued desperately. Was my client aware he was being recorded? If not, it's inadmissible. California is indeed an all-party consent state, Mr. Hayes, Anya countered smoothly. However, the law makes an exception for confidential communications. A conversation can be recorded without the consent of all parties if there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. I would argue that a husband plotting to fraudulently seize custody of his child and defraud his wife does not have a reasonable expectation of privacy when discussing his scheme. Furthermore, the conversation was not with my client. It was with a third party. My client simply activated the recording device in the room before the third party arrived. Judge Thorne considered this for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The entire case now teetered on her decision. Donovan Sterling was visibly sweating his carefully tailored suit, suddenly looking like a straitjacket. "I will allow it," the judge declared, "but I am reserving my final judgment on its admissibility. The content will determine its relevance. Proceed, Ms. Sharma." Anya nodded to the bailiff, who brought over a set of speakers and connected the small digital recorder. Anya pressed a button. For a second, there was only static. Then a voice filled the courtroom. It was Donovan's voice. but not the sorrowful, earnest voice he had used on the stand. This voice was cold, clinical, and dripping with contempt. Donovan's voice. The key is consistency. Marcus, every single interaction has to support the narrative. She's unstable. She's emotional. She's a risk. A second voice, smoother and with a hint of a British accent, replied. It was Marcus Thorne, Donovan's longtime business partner and friend. Marcus's voice. It still feels drastic, Don. Sole custody. Before the kid's even born. The optics are terrible. In the courtroom, Donovan's face had gone ashen. He looked at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. Donovan's voice. The optics are the point. It's not about the kid. It's about the prenup. You know this. The infidelity clause is a killer. If she files for divorce and proves I've been with Chloe, she gets 20%. 20% of everything, Marcus. That's not just money, that's control. That's a voting share in the company. Isabella let out a small, strangled gasp. It wasn't just about cruelty. It was about money. All this pain, all this humiliation was a business transaction to him. Anya placed a steadying hand on her arm. Marcus's voice. And painting her as an unfit mother gets you around that. How Donovan's voice. It reframes the entire divorce. It's no longer about my affair. It's about a heroic father saving his child from a crazy alcoholic mother. I file first. I control the narrative. By the time she realizes what's happening, every news outlet in the country will have the story. My story. She'll be so busy defending her sanity she won't have time to look for proof of my indiscretions. We'll bury her in legal fees and psych evaluations. She'll be radioactive. In the end, she'll be so beaten down she'll be grateful to walk away with nothing just to get away from me. There was a long pause on the recording and in the courtroom. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. The sheer calculated cruelty of the plan was breathtaking. Marcus's voice. And Chloe is on board with all this. The late-night meetings, the fake reports, Donovan's voice. A cold laugh. Chloe does what she's told. She knows where her loyalty lies. Besides, she thinks it's all for her. She thinks I'm going to leave Isabella and we'll be one big happy family. She's useful. At the back of the courtroom, a small choked sob escaped from Chloe Bishop. Her face, which had been pale, was now a blotchy, tear-streaked canvas of utter devastation. The man she had committed perjury for the man she clearly loved had just called her a useful tool on a recording being played in open court. Marcus's voice in the baby shower. The photos, Donovan's voice, perfect. Couldn't have scripted it better myself. A few cleverly angled photos, a loyal employee's testimony. It's all you need. You just have to build the cage bar by bar. By the time they realize they're trapped, it's too late. The world doesn't believe in nuance, Marcus. It believes in headlines. And the headline will be, Billionaire fights for unborn child. Not adulterous tycoon cheats pregnant wife. Anya Sharma pressed the button and silence returned. But the silence was different now. It was heavy accusatory. It was filled with the ugliness of Donovan Sterling's words. Preston Hayes was staring at his client, his mouth slightly agape, the face of a lawyer who knows he has been lied to and has just witnessed his case. His reputation and his client's entire life implode in the space of 2 minutes. Donovan Sterling sat frozen in the witness box. The mask of the concerned husband, the philanthropist, the pillar of the community had not just been cracked, it had been vaporized. What was left was a creature of pure reptilian calculation. He turned his head slowly and looked at Isabella. For the first time, the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something else, pure, unadulterated hatred. He had been beaten. And he had been beaten by the one person in the world he had underestimated most, his pregnant wife. The silence that followed the first part of the recording was a physical entity. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that smothered all sound, all thought. In that vacuum, the truth of Donovan Sterling's character was laid bare, ugly and writhing under the merciless fluorescent lights. He had confessed to a conspiracy of breathtaking cruelty, and the courtroom had become a gallery of his moral autopsy. Preston Hayes, a man who built his career on aggressive rhetoric and unshakable confidence, sat slumped in his chair, his face the color of old parchment. He stared at his client, but the look was not one of anger or betrayal. It was the vacant, horrified stare of a man who had confidently piloted a magnificent ship directly into a reef that his own captain had deliberately hidden from the charts. His career wasn't just stained. It was contaminated, inextricably linked to the fraud that had just been perpetrated on the court itself. Donovan remained in the witness box, a king dethroned in his own castle. The mask of the concerned husband had been incinerated, and what was left was raw, unadulterated hubris caught in the headlights of its own destruction. His mind, usually a whirlwind of strategic calculations, was a static-filled void. He could hear his own voice, cold and clinical, echoing in the chamber, and it sounded like a stranger's. He saw Isabella, her hand protectively on her stomach, and for a fleeting, insane moment, he felt a surge of rage, not at his own folly, but at her for exposing him. He had built an empire on the principle of control, and he had just lost it completely and irrevocably to the one person he had dismissed as a mere pawn. Across the aisle, Isabella felt a wave of nausea followed by a profound, hollow ache. The vindication was there, sharp and clear, but it was tangled with the sickening realization that her marriage, her love, her unborn child, all of it had been nothing more than a strategic maneuver in a corporate game. She wasn't even the primary target. She was just collateral damage, a smokescreen. The cruelty felt almost impersonal, which was somehow even more devastating. Anya Sharma placed a firm, grounding hand on her forearm. A silent message. Stay strong. It's not over yet. It was Anya who finally broke the spell. Her voice when she spoke was devoid of triumph. It was measured, solemn, the voice of an officer of the court bringing a grim duty to its conclusion. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the still stunned judge, "there is one final 30-second portion of this recording. I believe it is vital for the court to hear it." Judge Thorne, who had been staring at Donovan with an expression of profound disgust, slowly shifted her gaze to Anya. A flicker of something new entered her eyes. Not just anger at the family court deception, but the dawning comprehension that this went far beyond a custody battle. "Proceed, Ms. Sharma," the judge said, her voice low and dangerous. Anya pressed play. The clinical tone of Donovan's voice once again filled the room, a chilling echo of the man sitting frozen in the witness box. Marcus's voice. "It's a hell of a risk, Don. The whole thing. If this custody battle goes sideways, if she gets a smart lawyer who starts digging..." Donovan's voice. "That's why the custody battle is the perfect cover. Nobody's looking at the finances when they're distracted by the drama. While the world is watching me play the heartbroken husband, you and I will be finalizing the liquidation of the Phoenix Fund. We moved the assets offshore just like we planned. By the time anyone even thinks to look, the money's gone, the fund is a shell, and the investors are left holding an empty bag. The divorce is the smokescreen for the real prize. This isn't about saving 20% with Isabella. It's about securing 100% of the Phoenix Fund. This custody hearing is the best misdirection money can buy." The recording clicked off, and this time the silence was different. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a crime scene. The words, Phoenix Fund, offshore, and empty bag, hung in the air, each one a nail in Donovan Sterling's coffin. This was no longer just perjury and emotional abuse. This was grand larceny, conspiracy, a federal crime of immense proportions confessed to in open court. Judge Marianne Thorne's face was a granite mask of cold fury. The weariness she had shown earlier was gone, replaced by the righteous anger of the law itself being mocked. She slowly, deliberately put her glasses back on her eyes, locking onto Donovan. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a shard of glass, "you may step down." Donovan didn't react. He seemed paralyzed, his mind unable to process the command. The judge's voice hardened. "Bailiff, escort Mr. Sterling back to his table. Now. The uniformed bailiff, a large man who had watched the entire proceeding with stoic impassivity, approached the witness stand. He didn't touch Donovan, but his presence was an undeniable force. "Sir," the bailiff said, his voice quiet but firm. "Let's go." The touch of the bailiff's hand on his elbow finally broke Donovan's paralysis. He stood on legs that felt like hollow reeds. As he walked the 10 feet back to his table, every eye in the room followed him. It was the longest walk of his life. He collapsed into his chair, staring at the polished wood of the table, unable to meet the horrified, accusatory gaze of his own lawyer. Judge Thorne then turned her steely eyes to the back of the courtroom where Chloe Bishop was rocking back and forth, her face buried in her hands, emitting small, wounded sounds. "Ms. Bishop," the judge commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "You will remain in this courthouse. You are not to leave the premises. I have a feeling the district attorney will want to speak with you before the day is over." Chloe's quiet sobs turned into a full-throated, hysterical cry of pure terror. She had walked in here a loyal soldier in a corporate war. She was now a person of interest in a major criminal investigation. Finally, the judge's gaze settled on Isabella, and for the first time a flicker of something other than judicial anger showed in her eyes, a sliver of empathy. "This court," she began, her voice resonating with absolute power, "is hereby placing a temporary emergency sole legal and physical custody order in favor of the respondent, Mrs. Isabella Sterling. Mr. Sterling is to have no contact, not direct, not indirect, not through third parties, with Mrs. Sterling or the unborn child, effective immediately. Ms. Sharma, draw up the restraining order. I'll sign it before I leave the bench." Each word was a judicial thunderclap, dismantling Donovan's petition and his paternal rights in a single swift stroke. Furthermore, she continued, her voice rising as she turned her full fury back toward Donovan and his lawyer, "Given the unambiguous confession of conspiracy to commit financial fraud presented as evidence today, I am making a formal referral of this entire matter, the recording, the transcripts, my own observations, to the district attorney's office for charges including, but not limited to, perjury and conspiracy. I am also referring it to the Securities and Exchange Commission for federal investigation." She paused, letting the weight of his new reality crush Donovan Sterling. "Mr. Hayes," she said, addressing the shell-shocked lawyer, "while your client is no longer in need of a family law attorney, I would strongly advise you to ensure he retains a criminal defense attorney. Immediately." With that, Judge Thorne lifted her gavel high. It hung in the air for a moment, a symbol of the justice that had been so nearly perverted. Then it came down with a final explosive crack that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. "This court is adjourned." The sound shattered the tension. As the judge swept from the room, a tidal wave of noise rushed into the void. Preston Hayes, scrambling for his phone, was already barking at his office, his voice a panicked, high-pitched version of its former confident baritone. From the hallway, the murmur of the press corps erupted into a full-blown clamor as the bailiff opened the doors and the shocking outcome began to leak out. Isabella let out a long, shuddering breath and finally allowed the tears to fall freely. Anya wrapped an arm around her, holding her steady. It was over. The nightmare was over. She had not only saved her son, she had unknowingly uncovered a far greater crime, a truth far darker than she could have ever imagined. She looked one last time across the aisle. Donovan Sterling, the Titan, the master of the universe, sat alone at his table. His lawyer was already distancing himself, focused on his own survival. The sycophants were gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a small, hollowed-out man in a ridiculously expensive suit, staring into the abyss that had just opened up beneath him. He had built a gilded cage for her, but in the end, the only person trapped inside was himself. The story of Isabella and Donovan Sterling is a chilling reminder that truth can be silenced, but rarely forever. A man with everything to lose gambled it all on a throne of lies, underestimating the quiet strength of the woman he tried to break. That secret recording wasn't just evidence. It was a detonation exposing the rot beneath the gilded surface of power and privilege. It proves that sometimes the smallest voice can unleash the loudest justice. If this story of truth, betrayal, and ultimate vindication moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice served. What did you think of the twist? Let us know in the comments below.